Hello and welcome back to the Cardiff Central podcast, the first pod of the 2025-26 season. Question from Rob: how are you going to get through everything? Well, we're going to talk quite fast and skirt over stuff that we're not particularly interested in. It's been 2.5 months since we've recorded, and well, maybe there hasn't been that much. There's only been two new contracts, three signings, two loan signings, one loan departure, fixture announcements, signing rumours. The CEO's left. Wales went on tour to Japan. There's a new Wales head coach. The 20s didn't do that well at the Junior World Cup. And just to top it all off, there was the quiet and definitely non-divisive restructuring of professional rugby in Wales. We'll attempt to cover all that and answer your questions. Let's get into it. Yeah, we're back again for another season. If you're new to the pod or if you're tuning back in after a little time away and forgotten how we do things around here, my name's Dan Pearce. I'll be the first voice you hear most weeks throughout the season. I'll be joined by a revolving panel of expert Cardiff fans giving you their thoughts on all things mainly to do with the first team, but we'll have regular rags corners and updates from the pathway. We'll give our thoughts on what's going on in the Wales national team from a Cardiff perspective as well, and try and keep up with the constant change of whatever the WRU are doing at the moment. Unfortunately, none of the experts were available this week, so I've had to settle for Andrew Ford and Tony Esposito. Andrew, how are you? How was your summer?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, mate.
Good. So, Tony, how was your summer?
It was all right until you absolutely blindsided me there.
I
Probably
wrote
about
down. I knew you knew you'd both like that one. Just while we're on the panelists as well, congratulations from all of us to other panelists, Fraser and Harley, who've both welcomed baby boys over the summer. First for Fraser and a second for Harley. So congratulations to them and their families. Cracking on.
Congratulations to Dan on getting married. So it's
Yes, I have. I have also got married as well. I wasn't going to mention it because obviously a massive pull of this podcast is my personal sex appeal, and the fans will be disappointed to find out I'm no longer on the market. But yeah, the current Mrs. Pierce has tied me down to a contract. So apologies to all for that news. We'll crack on then and start with actual rugby news from the Arms Park that's happened over the summer before we get into sort of heavy and deep stuff. We've had, as I mentioned on the intro, three new signings and two loan signings. So those are permanent signings are Javin Sebastian and Sam Wainwright, both tight heads from Edinburgh and Scarlets respectively. And George Knott, second row from the Dragons. Loan signings then a loose head prop Johan Emmanuel and scrum half Ian Davis, both on loan from Bath, both young Welsh talents. And the new contracts, which were announced just after we finished recording the back end of last season, were Talupe Faletau and Rory Jennings. And then the one departure is Mackenzie Martin, who's gone out on a season-long loan to the Dragons. Fordy, coming to you first. What sort of piques your interest out of that list of names?
I think the Faletau contract news is huge. More importantly, just getting bums on seats. But I think back to that game against Munster last season at the Arms Park, he was unreal. And despite he played in the first test against Japan in the summer, and he's one of the better players on the park, despite a pretty dire performance there. And if we can keep him wrapped in cotton wool to some extent, it'd be quite nice to get him out for a few games next season because he's just brings the whole crowd onto their feet whenever he plays. So yeah, kind of delighted that he stayed on for another year.
Tony, same question.
yeah, I'm really pleased that we still got quite close connections with Bath. Getting these two lads on loan, especially after we got Hennessy for the one game last year that was meant to be a bit longer, but other stuff turned out. It's disappointing to lose Big Mac for a season. Hoping he gets game time there and comes back with a bit of fire, but especially with what he said about Faletau resigning, you think him playing and learning from the best number 8 that Wales have ever created would be a plus point to sticking around with us.
Yeah, it's interesting with the Big Mac one because he is out of contract then next summer as well, which sort of, if he does well at the Dragons and he feels settled there, then we don't actually see the benefit from loaning him because he potentially just signs there if he wants to and stays there, or puts himself in the shop window for other clubs to come in, and you lose that close contact with him not being in the building every day. So yeah, I understand the frustration element of him not getting as much game time as he might have liked and stuff, but yeah, I think maybe there's he's still young and he's wants what he wants and but then also maybe the club haven't covered themselves in glory communication wise with him either, so maybe a bit to learn on both ends there. For the we'll cover like the full squad at some point in pre-season and go over it, but I wonder, with those three signings of Sebastian, Wainwright and Knott, do we feel like the squad has improved, or have they just filled holes that we've had?
I'd argue they filled holes because I think, particularly with someone like George Knott, a lot of people were underwhelmed when he was announced. But you kind of got Teddy and Josh McNally nailed on in the second row. We were never going to really sign like a Will Skelton or Mara Itoje type figure just to start week in, week out. I think it kind of fills the void there quite well in terms of depth at second row. And it's the same with Javan Sebastian and Sam Wainwright. Is kind of we were after some tight heads, and although Wainwright was only capped a couple of times a few years ago, they are two international tight heads which aren't really easy to come by in the current market. So I don't think they were ever going to set the world alight, but they're solid signings, particularly from a depth point of view, where I think we've got the players who are starting kind of nailed on anyway. So they're kind of good to kind of push competition. That's the way I see it, really.
Yeah, Tony, like there's obviously the age old Cardiff question of we need a sort of brutal South African lock to come in and sort it. But in the current circumstances of uncertainty and WRU ownership, like do we just sort of have to be happy that we've got the squad filled at the moment and wait to see what happens before adding to that type five?
Isn't McNally that South African lock in an English body though? He did exactly what we needed last year. Hopefully we can get a similar level of performance, probably not that top level if he's getting on a bit, but having not there to help replace him, so he's not having to go through so many minutes. It's a hole filled, but McNally and Teddy looked superb towards the end of last year, right? And if they can hit the ground running at the same sort of level, it's the Sebastian one is a bit confusing. I've never been that enamored by him when I've seen him play, but hopefully it goes wrong. So.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing about second row potentially is to see where Ben Donnell sits in the depth chart there as well, because with Alex Mann once again coming to the fore at the back end of last season, Tame Basham coming in as well, both of them still there. The back row depth is still very strong. So does Donnell potentially jump above like Rory Thornton, actually go into the season, potentially even George Knott, and go into the season as a third choice second row for us, which he's not as brutally physical, but if you paired him up with a Josh McNally, that's a perfectly good second row pairing, I would say, if we're assuming that Teddy, as time goes on, will become less and less available for us, as Team Wales internationals tend to be. Tony, you're looking confused.
No, I was just like in the back of my head, I sort of remembered that Rory Thornton had taken over as the Rags lineup coach as well. So the Donnell thing makes more sense if he pushes Thornton down the list. If we see Thornton doing what Harry sort of did, of transitioning out of the verse into the Rags more and more, especially to help build those academy lads through.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's the other name to chuck in there as well, is that Tom Cottle joins the club this summer in the senior academy. He'll obviously start at the Rags for the first part of the season, but depending on how he progresses, we may well see him in the first team towards the back end of the season, especially if there was a few injuries along the way. The other sort of more recent news around the squad and additions / potential additions come in the form of two Wales internationals in the back three. We've got fullback Liam Williams, obviously formerly of this parish, is training with the club throughout this pre-season in a bid to get match fit. He Hasn't played. I think it was the first round of the Six Nations last season, wasn't he? He got injured out in France whilst at Saracens at the time on a short-term deal, having left Kubota Spears in Japan. Yeah, so he's back in and training with us. Potentially with a view to us signing him, potentially just put himself in the shop window. And then the other piece of news that's come out in the last week or so is that Lewis Rees-Zammit is returning to rugby from the NFL, having given it a go with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars. He hasn't said where he intends to sign yet, but Neil Fissler of Rugby Pass has chucked Cardiff's name into the hat as a potential option for him, which spark the predictable response online, I think. But Fordy, from our point of view, both, either, neither. I don't know. Would you consider either of them as potential signings for Cardiff?
I'd definitely consider them, but as a case of whether we need them, I think is quite an important question. Like again, when I was talking about Faletau, he gets bums on seats. I think both Rees-Zammit and Liam Williams would certainly get many people down to the Arms Park, particularly Rees-Zammit, considering everything that's gone on. They'd be like statement signings, but I think you've touched on it already, Dan. I think on Twitter about how Jockey quite likes a big winger and a small winger, and I think Rees-Zammit certainly fits that mold. And if you were to look at Liam Williams as a winger, granted he's not the biggest, but he's a lot bigger than your Tom Bowens, Theo Cabangos, and Iwan Stevens, so he could kind of fit in there. Because I certainly would want Winner and Beetham to be given more of a crack at fullback. I think it would be quite a naive thing to sign Liam Williams and just chuck him in at fullback all season, because it'd be a bit of a waste of development for Winner and Beetham. But I think it's one of those of I'd be happy if they signed, but like I wouldn't be too disappointed if they didn't.
On Rees-Zammit in particular, Tony, obviously a lot of the backlash was around all the WRU were buying him for Cardiff, basically. I don't necessarily think that's true. We know that the new PRA that we signed up, we were sort of forcibly signed up to, really, as our WRU's best mates now, allows us to spend up to £5.1 million on player budget this season. But Matt Sherratt mentioned in his sort of end of season interview with the club did at the end of last season that they're working to the same 4.5 million budget as things stand. So there's a bit of money there in the new PRA if we want to go and get him. Is he, coming back from the NFL, what are we expecting him to come back? Is he worth it?
Yeah, that's the thing. He'll have changed his body composition because of the position that he's been trying to make in the NFL. So he's been trying out as a wide receiver, and they did try him at kick returner a little bit. And you've got to be so much bigger, as in muscle mass wise, that maybe he loses some of that cutting thing. It'd be really interesting to see if he does actually get any game time anywhere, or the club start releasing photos of what he actually looks like now. Because I've not seen him without pads on, throughout the whole of this. So be really interested to see whether he's still able to do what he was able to do before he left to go to the NFL. Then there's also the talk that he's interested in this R360 thing. So if he did sign with us, would it just be a 1-year deal? And would that work for us and get bums on seats like Fordy said? I'm more interested in us keeping. If I could only keep one of them, I would keep Sanjay, mainly because I want to see what he can, or what sort of development he helps Winnett do. Because Winnett's still young and still raw, and having Liam Williams even just to look at film with on a week by week basis can help that lad's game massively, because he's already great in the air. If he can just add a couple of bits and pieces here and there, then the sky's the limit, right? So
I think the other thing to add into to that whole thing about Zammit as well is that the reports are that he sort of, I don't know whether it's a fully informed his decision to return to rugby from the NFL, but he was certainly unlikely to play much preseason NFL for the Jacksonville Jaguars because he picked up some sort of back strain, I think it was, early in their training camp. So yeah, absolutely right to mention his body composition and return to sort of getting in rugby condition, and when can that start as well is the other question, because if he does have a back problem and he's not getting that underway for a couple of weeks, and then you just know that as soon as he's fit, he's getting into that Wales squad no matter what, really. Like, he's definitely returning to the international scene. And then if he does go to this new franchise league next summer, you might pay him quite a lot of money to feature for you less than sort of 6 or 7 times, which admittedly we're not in a position as WRU owners, ownership to be thinking necessarily fully about how much value for money Cardiff get. The WRU will be thinking mainly about how much value for money the WRU get out of it. But yeah, well, certainly, I don't think just on a fully Cardiff basis it'll be a worthwhile signing necessarily.
It also might be, and this is a slightly different thing, we're next door to the WRU, so any players that they have on their radar might just be that come into us for training, because they do own us now. So you might see a lot of those like exile sorts of players coming in for a couple of weeks here and there, because they can then still do S&C with the Wales guys wherever they are, because it's all local and it's all connected. So
Absolutely. We've had a whole bunch of listener questions on the sort of the squad and possible signings and stuff. A couple of them sort of linked to what you were saying, Ford, and what I've been mentioning over the last few weeks, that I think the biggest hole in the squad at the moment is somewhere around that outside centre right winger channel. So Zach on Twitter just said something something Zamet something something Lilo replacement. Frisbee Richards on Blue Sky says, "What do we think the options at 13 are when the inevitable happens?" And Gareth on Twitter says, "How do we address the seemingly weaker areas?" And mentions outside centre there as well. 4D, what do you think the depth chart is outside centre at the moment?
I think we're kind of hoping that Grady is kind of pinning all our hope on Grady at the moment to be starting 13. Because outside of that, obviously we've got Harry Millard, but I think we're looking a bit slim. There's obviously Elijah Evans as well, but still quite young and raw. Um, I'm just praying that we sign some sort of outside centre at some point, because Grady was out for the whole of last season, almost. So a repeat of that, and we're kind of in a lot of trouble.
Tony, there's been sort of people have started to think about who could fit in there on an emergency basis. Obviously, Adams comes up. Do we think Beetham could do a job there? And is it just now a stock answer if there's a gap in the Cardiff squad to say, oh, Beetham could do a job there and he'll just play wherever?
I was going to mention that for second row when we were talking about that earlier. So he played 10 a bit when he was coming through the youth, or the academy stuff. So you'd think him getting a run at 12 at some point, and maybe playing with, because I think we've pushed Thomas to 13 at times, and just have those two. The numbers on their back doesn't really matter at that point. You can flip them around, especially with if you've got Yuan Lloyd inside. You can, to coin the Howley phrase, rugby chaos coming along. You've got any one of those three can stand in at first receiver, and then you've got run threats off all of them as well. So it has to keep defenses guessing. It'd be really interesting to see him getting a run at centre. I know he's got a massive boot as well, and he's a kicking option off the tee. Although we don't like that at Cardiff, do we?
Yeah, it feels like the obvious answer is just sign an overseas 13 to replace Lilo and get somebody in. But I do wonder, as mentioned earlier, about the WRU ownership and where we are at the moment, that whilst the WRU will probably live with the optics of if they did go and sign a Rees-Zammit for us just on the basis that he's Welsh and will play for the national team, I think them going out and signing a half decent overseas outside centre for us probably isn't something they're prepared to broach at this point in time.
There's an overseas centre who's just made his debut for Tonga that might be interesting.
I don't know, if Halaholo just came back like they saw 14 players ran out on the pitch in the first game against Lions, and then somebody at the back shouts, "It's Willis Halaholo's music," and he just appears out of the tunnel. That would be probably the best moment in Arsenal history. Other questions then. 4D Ben on Twitter asks, how do we see Yuan Lloyd playing out this season? Is he a genuine contender for the 10 jersey?
I suspect so. I find it hard to believe he's coming in just as a utility back, particularly when he went to Scarlets. He was kind of said he was a 10. I know he played 15 quite a lot. I was having a look at what positions he played, and over the last 2 years, he exclusively played either 10 or 15. But I think the club website has him listed as a utility back, whether that's they see him as potentially a winger, which he did play for Bristol, and he played in the centres as well for Bristol. But yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a bit of a straight shootout between Sheedy and Yuan Lloyd for that 10 shirt. And it does give, I feel like with Winnett and Beetham there, I feel like again it would be a bit of a waste to give Yuan Lloyd a shot at 15, but it depends on the sort of game they want to play. Um, but I think there's definitely a scope for him to slot in at centre or wing if necessary. But I think it's very much just a straight shootout between him and Sheedy at 10. And we love a 6-2 split on the bench, so he'd kind of fit very well as the number 23 option.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably what they've thought of when he signed. Really, it will be interesting to see though how when the time inevitably comes that Sheedy's injured or not rested for 1 week, with Stefan Manuel's breaking through as well slowly at inside centre, whether Jockey picks Ben Thomas over Yuan Lloyd at 10 at some point and leaves Yuan Lloyd on the bench potentially as that 23, if that's like the genuine position that he signed him for, is bench impact player. But I'm just looking forward to the training ground clip where Yuan Lloyd goes back under Josh McNally again, like that try he scored against us against Scarlets last year, because that must have given McNally nightmares, I think, as Yuan Lloyd just wriggled just completely underneath him. What was the next question? Glenn on Twitter, Tony asks, who do we think will have the most impact this season in the squad?
New signings or existing?
Well, he mentioned Mulder that he thinks will is somebody to keep an eye on. So any player who would you back as maybe a surprise package as an impact player?
Really good shout, especially with how he ended the season, coming from third choice scrum half to basically be first choice towards the end. He seemed to pair up really well with Sheedy the last month or two. I think from South Africa onwards, right? Again, I'm just looking for Teddy to make big steps again, and Alex Mann to try and get some of the form he had towards the end of the year, which was the form he had the year before, or so. If I'm going to be nailed on one, it's Teddy. I just want Teddy to keep improving, just so other people start to realise how good that boy actually is.
Absolutely. And then the last question, which I was having to think about earlier, Gareth asked, do we think some of the youngsters will have breakout seasons this year? And obviously we've mentioned like Elijah Evans and guys like Winnett and Beetham are still very young. Matty Young could jump in there as well at fullback. But featured quite prominently in the pre-season stuff has been Lucas de la Rua so far. He's obviously been training day in, day out with the senior team. He's must be 21, 22 now. Has had sort of cameos here and there. I recall him playing quite well against Bath in that Champions Cup game home season before last. But I think I feel like he's a player who's done with the rags now. He's kind of completed that level of rugby, and it's now time for him to step up. And the back row is still got good depth, but there is a shift in that back row away from sort of out and out fetchers at 7, which allows somebody like De La Rua, who could genuinely be a 6, 7, and 8, to come in and make an impact. And it's a position where there inevitably will be injuries. So if you see potentially a Botham or a Basham getting international honours and then 1 or 2 other injuries, there'll be options for De La Rua to get into a matchday squad there. And I feel like it's kind of this season or never potentially for him to really make the step up and play senior rugby. So I'll be interested to see how he gets on. Right, other roundup stuff that's happened, sort of rugby department linked over the summer. We've had fixture announcements, pre-season. Cardiff will be playing Richmond, English Championship side, at home on Saturday, the 6th of September at 3 p.m. That also doubles up as Summerfest, so they'll be unveiling the kits and there'll be Q&As and all sorts of stuff for family day out to do. So hopefully there's good weather for that. And then the following week, second pre-season game is away at Leinster, Saturday the 13th of September. All those details are still to be confirmed, presumably by some sort of World Rugby disciplinary panel who seem to be shaping Leinster's pre-season themselves, even though it's nothing to do with them. But we'll wait to see exactly what they announce in terms of where it is and what time that is. And then Challenge Cup news over the summer as well. They've done the draw and the fixture release. So Cardiff are in a pool with Cheetahs, Stade Francais, Ulster, Racing, and Exeter. And then you may think, if we're only playing four of those teams, we won't be playing Ulster because they're in our league. How wrong you are. EPCR have once again managed to fluff the organisation of the European competition. So we'll be playing first up on the 6th of December, Stade Francais away. Then the following week, 13th of December, Ulster at home because we don't see them enough. And then two quite good fixtures, though, in January. Racing at home on Saturday the 10th, which should be quite a good occasion at the Arms Park, that one. And Exeter away on Sunday the 18th. Why we're not playing the Cheetahs, I don't know. We wait for that elusive trip to Amsterdam, which, I mean, when it comes, there'll be like 10,000 Cardiff fans out there. We'll be waiting for it for like 3 years. But a tough run of games, those. But hopefully we'll have a better dig at actually trying to qualify for a home knockout game on the back of them. And then two sad pieces of news just before heading to the break of the pod. Two Cardiff linked people have passed away over the summer. Chris Padfield is an ex-Newbridge and Ebbw Vale player who coached there as well, but also coached at Cardiff during the mid-70s. He was part of the coaching team when Cardiff beat Australia in November 1975 and went on to leave his teaching profession and become one of the first rugby development officers for the Welsh Rugby Union. And Carl Smith has also passed away, a former back rower. He was born in St Kitts, arrived as a young lad in Cardiff, played first for Swansea, but then came to the Blue and Blacks, making 239 appearances and scoring 28 tries from the back row. Never played for Wales, I suspect at that time, largely due to his skin colour, unfortunately, but would go on to play for Pontypridd as well with three successful seasons there, was widely considered as one of the best back rowers to never play for Wales. That's Chris Padfield and Carl Smith. Our thoughts are with their friends and family after their passing. At this point of the pod then, the annual subscribe and like message is back. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, subscribe and like and leave a review. If you're watching us on YouTube, then do subscribe to the channel. Yes, you see Tony's lovely face there, and like the video. I know producer Lee has done a video explaining the future of this. I think he's made a second channel as well on YouTube as the vast empire of podcasts that he produces grows by the week. So on this rap channel, there'll be the main rap that covers all four Welsh teams and then the four individual club podcasts, us and the three others. I think the SRC pod is staying here as well. And then on the other channel, which will be linked somewhere down below, you'll find the worldwide ones, the URC Rewind. There's an American pod now. I think there's plans for Premiership ones as well. And there'll also be the women's rugby pod as well, which I saw they've started filming their Women's Rugby World Cup previews. Wales get underway a week Saturday, I think, 23rd of August against Scotland. Interesting squad that they've named. A couple of youngsters in there as well. They seem to play a bit better down in Australia than they had over the last few years under Sean Lynn. So be interesting to see how they go. Right then, gents. I've put it off long enough. We're getting political now. So it's been an interesting summer as a Welsh rugby fan. When is it ever quiet, to be fair? But this one in particular, I can't even remember if we were still podcasting when the news initially broke. But it came out that the WRU were seriously considering going down to two teams over the summer. That sort of ebbed and flowed a little bit as the Scarlets and Ospreys didn't sign up to the new PRA. Cardiff and Dragons did. There was a long period where sort of nothing happened, and then all of a sudden the WRU announced that they were indeed going out to consultation on a restructuring of the professional game in Wales. That's starting soonish, in the next week or two. I believe that it's the preferred. I can't remember what they've actually said. It's not the preferred, but it's their optimal solution, I think, is the words they've described. Good corporate speak. Is being presented to the WRU board for approval, and then it's that which will be taken to the consultation involving everybody you can think of, pro clubs, ex-players, current players, the national team setup, fans, all sorts. I don't know. Maybe we'll get them on each individual rap podcast to discuss it with us all individually what they think. But that will then be confirmed by October, and they'll let us know which way they're going with it. 40, coming to you from a Cardiff perspective, rather than sort of trying to give everybody's thoughts across Welsh rugby, which is impossible to do, I think. What have we made of the summer? What's it been like watching it from a Cardiff perspective?
There's an element of security in some ways of what's gone on with the whole administration, that the WRU kind of saving us. I feel an element of security that I'd like to think Cardiff is safe to some extent, but then you hear all these mixed messages almost every week, if not daily, where everything just seems to be changing the ideas of what's going to happen in the future, that I almost try and keep myself away from it, because the more I think about it, the more annoyed I get. But it does definitely seem that there's been a massive shift in kind of the way everything's going to be going forward. But yeah, from a Cardiff perspective, I'm hoping, I think it's next season that everything's going to kind of kick off, isn't it? They're going to announce it in October, and then it'll all change for next season. I'm optimistic that there'll still be Cardiff rugby playing at the Arms Park next season. I hope this doesn't come back to bite me.
Yeah, somebody clip that up. You can put it on. You should do a compilation of bad podcast takes and then just have yourself on. Tony, I guess the thing that I keep thinking about during all this is, do we have any confidence this will actually sort out the professional game in Wales, or do we just think in 12 months' time we'll be back talking about something else that the WRU have messed up governance-wise instead?
Nothing ever fills me with confidence when it comes to any of these conversations. There are so many rumors flying around. There's like was mentioned about the security. Like, I sort of feel that, sort of don't. Are we in the worst place to be because we're owned by them, so they could easily get rid of us? Like I've tried to stay away from commenting about stuff during the summer, like on social media and things, just because of that. Like, I don't want, like, I'm so worried that my own vision is kind of, one, by a general mistrust of the WRU, and two, my just absolute hope that Cardiff are all right, and that we are still in the guise of the Cardiff that we are now and that we have been for so long, especially with the 126th coming up, 125th coming up next year, I think it is. So it's just, for that to be our last year would be horrendous.
I do like the idea of doing anniversary for every year, though. Like the 126th, like, really means something.
I mean, we might need to start doing that, like, just so there's a bit of nostalgia and we can get rid of this.
40, we had a question from Rob on Twitter. His question was, there are rumours now of an East Pro Teams merger. What are the non-negotiables for you as a supporter to keep buying tickets to turn up and watch? So what I suppose the flip side to that is then what turns you away? What would mean that you wouldn't keep going down to the Arms Park if there was rugby still there, but it's not necessarily Cardiff rugby as we know it?
I think the team name of East Wales would put me off straight away. But again, I can't think of a name of a team. The names that people come out with, the proponents of two teams for many years, they come out with these team names that just sound shite. So just to put it bluntly, it'd be hard to kind of buy into anything. I think if there was any proper restructuring of kind of, I get kind of with regional rugby in 2003, there was an element of that with a lot of teams that it was kind of hard to buy in, but to then do that again would almost disillusion more people again. So yeah, I feel like it'd be really hard for me to buy in if it was a team that was kind of under a name like East Wales or any of the other names. I feel like I'd want still an element of Cardiff there, and that's purely from a selfish point of view. But again, it's my personal preference, so I'd really find it difficult to buy into any complete like change to what the current structure is right now.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, Tony, isn't it? That like there is no solution that suits everybody. Like obviously, ideally, all four teams would stay, and that WRU would sort of get their proper house properly in order, or maybe find a time machine to go back and undo the last 20 years of dreadful decisions that they made. But um, like if there is a merger or some sort of bungled, like as is probably likely to be us and the Dragons if they go down to two, trying to figure out some sort of East Wales thing, there is no way that I can see that end like the diehard Dragons and the diehard Cardiff fans would be happy with anything other than Cardiff and or Dragons. Like,
You look back to 2003 when the mergers all happened, and well, mergers, quote unquote, um, weren't they the Gwent Dragons, and they sold like 80 season tickets? They had to add Newport back to their name before people started buying season tickets.
yeah,
And whereas that might well have changed now because we're 20 odd years in the future. Cardiff would get that. I think there would be a large proportion of people who have a season ticket now for Cardiff wouldn't support whatever came after if it wasn't Cardiff and had that lineage. Like the club for many, many years tried to pretend that we came into existence in 2003, and they couldn't convince anyone that was the truth. And finally we get them to start acknowledging it, and if they were to then throw it away again, or it was to be thrown away, I think there's just no coming back for a lot of people. Like I couldn't see myself going down to watch a non-Cardiff team play regularly. It'd be really interesting to see what sort of leagues they set up in as well. Like there's been talk about more bungled conversations with the English Premiership, and what happens with the URC if two of our teams do go. Who do they bring in? Is it the Georgian team, the Black Lions? Is it? And that sounds like a pub in the valleys. And add the Cheetahs because they're playing. But how it is just an absolute. Trying to think of a word that's not a swear word. Moving fastly on, just a mess.
yeah, and I think that's the thing is that we keep hearing this, this rumor. It's hard to know exactly what rumors have got legs and what ones don't at this point. There's so much flying around, but the sort of the East and West thing keeps coming up, and whether it's mergers or two new entities and stuff. But there's nothing really in the history of Welsh rugby which tells you that those things work. Like Tony said, the Gwent Dragons thing didn't get off the ground until they added Newport back in. Cardiff tried desperately to shake Cardiff. That didn't work, so now we're back to Cardiff again, as we actually always were, but just tried not to be. The Scarlets have sort of fluctuated a little bit with their Llanelli stuff and had the North Wales a part of the region for a bit, and that never really took off, and now they're just back to being like the team of West Wales as Llanelli always was, really. The Ospreys, I don't know that for a while there, the whole one true region stuff, it kind of worked, but I wonder how much them just being successful masked that. And now their average attendance is very low, and obviously there's no relationship with Neath there as one of the founding clubs of the Neath and Swansea Ospreys, and it'd be interesting to see, as they've announced today, as we're recording, that they're going back to Bridgend for next season. It'd be interesting to see what sort of crowds they get there, because a Friday night stretch down the M4 from sort of the far side of Swansea or anything in the Swansea Valley down to Bridgend and then getting home again afterwards, it's not going to be the most appealing, to be honest, I don't think. And like I do Llanelli to Cardiff, but I'm a one-off person. I don't think like if the whole Cardiff fan base was based in Llanelli and then was asked to go to Cardiff, that many people would do that every week. So
the Scarlets fan base travel down to watch the Scarlets week in, week out.
that's that's true. They do come up, but they come out of it okay. But that I think they're just like, it's like a sort of missionary thing. They go back to show their face every now and again. They have to do that, otherwise they're not actually allowed back into Llanelli every now and again. But yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is. I don't think the WRU know what the answer is, which is probably the most concerning thing. And they keep talking about consultations and collaboration. At some point, they do just need to be sort of decisive and direct this whole thing, I think. And whether we'll get to that point, we probably will get to that point too late, unfortunately, and it'll all go downhill from there. Focusing on Cardiff then in all this, 4D, it's all gone quite quiet, I think, from a Cardiff perspective in terms of we still don't really have like a chairman or a board or anything like that. Like, do we just sort of sit and wait and see what happens, or would we like the club to at least, or the WRU to at least get on and sort of show that they are trying to push Cardiff forward even in the meantime and give us some announcements of what's going on off field?
Yeah, it'd be nice to have some sort of communication, but as Tony touched on, don't really trust the WRU. It's not what they're best at. But I think from what I can see, just it's not much, but like it seems with the way social media they've been operating social media, it seems it's very much similar to how it was before. And there's that kind of control of like, for example, the stuff the media department put out is still very much what it was before. And I quite like that. So as long as they can have that independence to still continue in that way, I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, it'd be nice to have some sort of communication of how stuff off field is operating because again, what's going to be the case in a year if there's no communication and no kind of direction? As a result, the on-field performances will take a dip if there's no clear kind of structure there.
One thing we do know, Tony, mainly due to LinkedIn, I think more than anything, we knew that the Richard Holland was pretty much taking a step back after the collapse of the former legal entity and the Helford stuff, and then WRU coming in. Jamie Muir, I think he was like he was the stadium manager for a long time, I think, and then he stepped up to step into Reese Bloomberg's shoes when Reese headed off to the Dragons. He's now I can't think of what his job title is. I think they've named him like Chief Operating Officer or something, or Managing Director or something along those lines. So he's not necessarily CEO, but he's sort of doing the CEO on an interim basis. That does mean that Dickie's left, and it was mentioned in an Alex Bywater piece in the Daily Mail that Dickie, instead of just being put on gardening leave, has sort of been seconded to the WRU and is working on special projects in quotation marks, whatever that means for them. On Dickie, it's been, I think it's 14 years he was at the club as CEO. What's his legacy at Cardiff, I suppose, is a question.
Arms Park brought us back to the Arms Park, and that in itself is a massive plus point. So I never thought that would happen. I thought they would stick out at Cardiff City Stadium, and that would be it. So for that alone, yeah.
Not always been the most popular figure, though. Fair to say. I'm thinking of like.
What do you mean? I've always liked him.
But I don't think CEOs are ever meant to be popular. I feel like that's the thing. But I guess the question about whether he's had a good tenure or not is: do we think he's made more right decisions than wrong decisions while he's been there or not? The long pause suggests mostly wrong, I would think, in your mind.
I'm trying to phrase my sentence properly. It's really difficult to understand what he's done off the pitch because, going back to Fordy's point, there's never been massive amounts of transparency about how the club has been run. We've lurched from financial disaster to financial disaster. I think there's been about 3 threatened HMRC winding up orders and stuff like that. That like the buck stops at a CEO, right? Like for that sort of stuff because he runs the business. He ran the business. We lost Danny Wilson when he was in the 3rd year of his deal, effectively because the budget got cut at the last minute. There have been countless rumours that have come out that probably, who knows with Welsh Rugby whether they're true or not, about off-field stuff with the management, and who knows what they are, and like it's all scuttlebutt around Cardiff. I had loads of scuttlebutt, but he brought us back to the Arms Park, and if one thing can be said, that's a massive positive. We won the Challenge Cup under his tenure. Maybe we didn't kick on effectively from there because of other circumstances, but yeah.
And Fordy, looking ahead to chairman or chairperson coming in and new CEO potentially, uh, how much of a balance we'd like to see between retaining people that we know and that know the club and so can sort of fight for Cardiff Rugby and WRU, but also how important is it to get some outside people in to take us to the next level? And it's been a lot of the same faces for a long time at the club, so getting fresh faces in might be the answer, even if it risks our independence slightly.
Yeah, no, I can get behind that. I don't want to spend the whole podcast tarnishing the WRU, but it kind of got a bit of a reputation of some of the faces they get in isn't kind of what you're after for a rugby business. So yeah, definitely need kind of a balance. And I think particularly people who are pro Cardiff, I think there were kind of some individuals involved over the past years. I'm not going to name names who probably didn't have Cardiff's interests primarily at heart. And some of the stuff that's come out in the media about how they operated. But yeah, there's definitely a balance needed. People can just take the club to the next level. Don't know what the case is going to be this time next year, but again, I'd like to hope there's a Cardiff rugby team playing at the Arms Park, and it's probably important to get the right people involved to ensure that.
There was two listener questions sort of linked to the off-field political stuff and Cardiff's role within that. David on Facebook asked, do we think the WRU's valuation of Cardiff is hindering our chances of being taken over? Whilst Morgan asked, has there been any news about the sale of the club? I think it was reported by Wales Online a couple of weeks ago that after the WRU had invited expressions of interest, there'd been 5 potential bidders for the club who'd returned by the deadline that was set, I think, sometime around late June. We haven't heard anything since that. There's certainly been no whispers because there's nobody really at the club. I think at that top level, the leaks coming out have lessened somewhat dramatically. But I would say that I personally would struggle to see any scenario in which the club is sold prior to the WRU making that announcement of the future direction of professional rugby in October, because and I know people might say, oh, but the Scarlet's just been sold and the Ospreys have signed a long-term lease, but both of those things are heavily conditioned on what happens in October. So they've just gone ahead and announced, if we remain, the Scarlets then will have 55% ownership from this new people coming in, and the Ospreys will only be going to St. Helens if they are told that they've got a long-term future in October. And I suspect, although we haven't said anything publicly, I suspect that the situation for Cardiff is just that we've got people who are interested, but the process won't be going beyond those expressions of interest until we find out what's happening in October, because they're not going to want to purchase a business which could not have a rugby team attached to it in 2 months' time. And I suspect it's not really worthwhile the WRU pushing that forward when they know that there's potentially nothing to sell in 2 months as well. So, yeah, I think we would like some announcements on a sort of interim chair and interim board under the WRU, but I wouldn't expect anything sale-wise until we find out exactly what the state of play is.
Valuation.
Also, go on.
On the valuation of the club, any idea how much Newcastle got sold for?
I've absolutely no idea. They had significant debts which Red Bull have taken on, I think. Yeah. But no, I don't know. That would be an interesting to find out, because you'd think that probably there's a comparison to Cardiff there, sort of size of business, and yeah, we like as the capital, maybe we could attract a bit more, and the sort of the value of attached to the Arms Park and a long-term lease there might bump us up a bit. But yeah, certainly in terms of attendance and success and history and that sort of stuff, Newcastle are a historic team in a pretty big city. Yeah, that would be interesting. That's one for next week to find out. Unless anyone else got anything else to say on the political aspect of Welsh rugby, I think we're all fed up to the back teeth of it, to be honest, and we'll try not to linger on it on the pod over the next few weeks. Just bring it up as and when something major happens, but I suspect we'll end up talking about it more than we won't, unfortunately. Moving on then to last bits of rugby stuff, not necessarily related to the first team, but linked to Cardiff. The Rags are actually getting back up and running this Saturday. Pre-season action begins. They're playing excuse me, they're playing St Albans at Tremorfa Park in the Danfish Derby, I'm styling it anyway. I don't think they're officially styling it as that, but it's definitely what it is. Over the summer, the Rags have announced a couple of departures: Mark Thomas, Benji Williams, um, Charlie Manship has left as well. There's been a couple of academy players that have moved on. Cody Stone's gone to Merthyr, Fraser Jones has gone to Bridgend. And there's been a change of captain as well. Craig Hood has taken over from Sean Moore. They've announced a handful of new signings to the semi-professional squad. Ben Murphy, a loosehead prop, coming out of Cardiff Met, I think, but might be Cardiff Uni. Apologies, whichever. You probably won't like me getting that wrong, but one of the Cardiff universities. Then there's been Steph Davis, who's utility back, I think he's being described as. I don't know if he's a centre or fullback mainly. Cardiff lad who's been playing at Coventry in the English Championship for the last year. And Tom Williams, back three player, started out at the Ospreys, has spent the last few years on the Seven circuit with GB Sevens. Tony, as sort of the Rags guy, where do we think the Rags are going into this pre-season? It's quite a set. It's probably the least moves I remember from the last few summers of players in and out, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It's probably a good thing, especially with the amount of academy lads and fringe players that are put into the side. That gives them a settled place to work through and hopefully help build their confidence in that structure, especially with the way that Dan Fish wants them to play rugby. It's good that, like we mentioned earlier about Rory Thornton was line-up coach for the back end of the year. Hopefully that continues, and that we continue to see the Rags as a competitive team at the top end of the table that's also giving opportunities to our academy lads. And so a successful season again is being in that top 2, 3, and also having a couple of lads who are coming through and making their debuts for Cardiff or making themselves regulars at the first team.
Absolutely, and yeah, as you said about the young players, that's where the difference is over the last 2-3 years, that we've gone from hardly any academy players to suddenly absolutely loads of them. There are a couple of names who'll be joining the squad this season, most likely. Callum Donahue Proud, tight head. We mentioned Tom Cottle coming in from RGC at second row. Lloyd Lucas, fly half, who played a couple of games at the back end of last season after graduating in the under-18s. There's Yohan Penry in the centre, and two quite exciting back three players as well. Joseph Jones, who scored a lot of tries from Glantaf over the last few years, and Rhys Cummings as well, who's impressed in Wales under-18s games towards the back end of last season. And then we mentioned Ewan Emmanuel and Ian Davis as well on loan from Bath. I suspect we'll see that particularly Emmanuel at loosehead play for the Rags a fair bit, certainly in the first part of the season as well. Fordy, was it you mentioned about Tom Howe and potentially playing for the Rags and not for Glantaf this season?
Yeah, it's from what I've heard. I'm not sure if how happy Glantaf would be if this is broadcasted, but yeah, supposedly I think he's one of these players that's kind of being fast-tracked. I'm not sure how good that is necessarily for someone in his position to be fast-tracked so quickly, but there's not really an abundance of hookers in Welsh rugby at the moment. So if that is the case, it would be quite interesting. But I know there was like a restriction on he couldn't be involved. I'm not sure when his birthday is, but I don't think he can play until he's 18. SRC, because he can't play hooker until he's 18 because he can't scrum against 33-year-old props who probably do more than just scrum in the scrums.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So yeah, if you see Tom Howe and he's like playing at 6, and then when somebody points over there to the ref, and then he just appears in the front row and the ref's not looking. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how they get around that.
On the Phil Lever Rugby pod, Dan Coles told a story about him going on a touring group and having to play second row because he wasn't old enough to scrummage in the front row. I listened to today. Can you imagine him in the second row? It was for a women's team as well. And, they had Maud, I always forget her surname, from the Red Roses on, and yeah, they were falling about themselves, laughing about that story. It's worth a listen to that podcast. Not that
After this podcast, of course. So yeah, Rags are looking in fairly decent shape. They, as I said, play St Albans on the weekend, and there's 2 weeks, and then they're home to Esher RFC, who are in the National 2, I think, in England, on Saturday the 30th before they get underway. In the first couple of weeks of September, I think it's Saturday the 13th, they're away to RGC in their first game of the season. Talking to the young players, the 20s had a disappointing summer, I think it's fair to say, in the junior, or I still call it a Junior World Cup. I don't know, it's probably got some flashy name now, World Rugby Under 20 Championship or something. But out in the Italian heat in June, July time, they struggled in the pool stage, lost to Argentina and France, beat Spain, and then lost to England and Italy in the knockout rounds to finish ninth, I think, overall. Disappointing because the under 26 nations, they look quite good, but just couldn't quite back that up. Tony, you watched a few of the games. I don't know, like, do we just put it down to weather and conditions and just being unable to that relentless defense, or were they also just not quite as good as they were in Six Nations?
Yeah, I think the weather played a big bit. I got very confused when I saw a lot of players with beanie hats on, thinking they were waved until I think that they were covered in ice water. So I can't imagine that would have helped. But same condition for everyone, right? Stefan Manuel had some nice moments. Tom Bowen looked really good when he came off the bench at times. So there were some positives from a Cardiff perspective, but overall, yeah, it was quite a disappointing competition for the under-20s, and then they didn't cover themselves in glory afterwards. Sorry, we've forgotten that we've left the politics part and bad news part behind them.
Yeah, I think fortunately for the 20s, there's so much chaos in Welsh rugby at the moment that their poor behaviour on last night was somewhat swept under the carpet. But 4D, I thought the interesting thing from a Cardiff point of view was Elijah Evans playing right wing pretty much exclusively throughout the tournament. Seems like a possibility that he could use that as like an in to the first team and before stepping inside. But I don't know. I feel like the risk is always there potentially, like Owen Lane style, that they turn up on the wing and we just never move them inside. Like I don't know what you thought of his performances.
Yeah, no, it seems solid from the ones I watched. I think I mainly only ever caught like either first halves or second halves, and if it was a second half, it was kind of Wales were just abysmal in every second half. But yeah, it's kind of typical that as soon as you have a kind of solid outside centre, he then transitions to another position when you need an outside centre. But I guess, yeah, there's an option of that as a way in going forward. But again, he's still quite young. So I'd like to see him play mainly 13 for the Rags, especially when it's such a position in need.
Yeah, I think him and Oshan Darwin-Lewis, how they balance their game time will be interesting this season. Both sort of similar positions-ish. Oshan's maybe slightly more inside 12, 13. Whereas, yeah, Evans more of a 13, 14. A couple of guys still available though next season. Sean Davis had relatively decent run at scrum half and will still be 20s eligible next season. Oshan Darwin-Lewis as well will also be back in there. And it was good to see Cam Tyler Grocott make his debut in the final game as well. Started at loosehead. He wasn't in the initial squad, but I think he got called up after Louis Trevitt got sent off in one of the games, and he's had a nightmare run with injury last season. I think that was his last opportunity to get a Wales under-20s cap at that tournament. I believe he's too old after that one, so nice to see him get a go, and hopefully he'll be fit to play more often than not for the Rags this season. Also, then over the summer, national level wise, Wales went out to Japan with Matt Sherratt as once again as interim head coach, and he was joined this time by a who's who of Cardiff rugby coaching and playing past, with current defence coach Gethin Jenkins joining him to run the defence, and then Danny Wilson and Adam Jones, obviously well known as a Cardiff legend. I don't think he actually played for any other Welsh team. He filling up the coaching ticket. They lost the first test, but finally broke the losing streak and won out in the second test in once again what was just looked like unbelievable heat in Japan. Fordy, what did you make of Wales's trip out there?
The first test, I really regretted waking up at 6 a.m. for it. It was really just a bit of a downer on the rest of the day then, especially because I was then knackered by about 8 o'clock in the evening. But the second test, I think it was just an element of relief more than anything. Like, I really thought, I think it was about the 60th minute, because the same had happened in the first test where just the game had completely turned around by the 60th minute. It seemed like it was going that way again in the second test. So just an element of relief. I think there was some good performers individually. I think the bravery on Team Plumtree to have chucked that out the back pass in the second test was unbelievable. But yeah, kind of happy that Jockey said before that he took the role on again because he wanted to get that win to end that streak. And yeah, really happy for him that he managed that.
Yeah, it's only Jockey looked like obviously emotional at full time in that second test. What do you make of him as the head coach? There was a fair bit of criticism in the week between the two tests when the team got announced for the second test. There wasn't a huge amount of changes, but kind of stuck to his guns, and it turned out pretty well in the end. Do we think he's grown at all as a coach when he's had these national team incursions?
We've seen that from him quite a lot, though, where he sticks with players, and I think Gatland is obviously a massive proponent of that. He sticks with players that they like. My only criticism, and it's something we talked about quite a bit last year, is Sherritt's reluctance to make subs at times. At scrum half, we looked out on our feet in the last 60 or so minutes, after about 60 minutes, and maybe a bit before that as well. But his reluctance to make changes there just seemed to help have the game meander away. Hopefully he comes back from that stronger. He did for a little bit, where he was able to make those substitutions earlier and see how the game panned out. But then it looked like he fell back into that routine. So hopefully he's knocked that back out of himself. But it'll be massive experience for him just being in that environment and that sort of high pressure stuff. Same with Gethin, to prove that to step back up to that level and to do it again, and have a defence that looked all right. And our defensive system has looked all right last year as well, looked good last year. So yeah, it's hopefully they've taken a lot of positives and stuff to work on as well, stuff to build on to make our season better.
Absolutely, and I think just to highlight a couple of Cardiff players as well, I thought Josh Adams looked as good as he has done for a little while in both of those games. To be fair to him, playing on the left wing, which that continues to be something where all of our wingers are better on the left wing than the right wing, but somebody's got to play on the right wing. But we'll cross that bridge as we go during the season. And a really nice moment for Liam Belcher as well to win 2 caps out there. You know, somebody who has gone around it the long way of being released and going to Dragons and coming back and being written off. And I was certainly somebody who definitely thought, I'm not sure he's big enough for international rugby and that there might be other hookers who should be in there, but made a great carry in the build up to that crucial try in the second test before Plumtree flings it around. And I noticed that I think his family got out there for the second test as well, so nice for them to see him.
He's shown time and time again that he's got that dog in him, and if you are a bit smaller, you need to have that sort of attitude. Hopefully he can kick on this year as well, and knowing that he can play at that level.
Absolutely, it'd be and if we're thinking Evan Lloyd presumably continues to kick on as well as his understudy, there'll be a good battle there for the number 2 jersey at Cardiff. Subsequent to that tour, then the WRU finally made their minds up on who was going to be the new head coach of the national team. It seemed like that they decided it was Tandy, and then Dave Reddin came in as the director of rugby and thought, actually, no, I want to review the process, and then reviewed the process and decided it was Tandy. So it was really worthwhile reviewing that process. Fordy, what do we think of Tandy coming in as head coach?
I think that there's very few head coaches in rugby at the moment that would have looked at the Wales role and thought that's a bit of me. So I think considering that, it's kind of expected that Steve Tandy's come in. I think it's intriguing that this is probably, is this the first Welsh head coach since Jenkins? Must be.
Was Ruddock after Jenkins or before? I can't really remember in my head now. No, he's after. Jenkins was after, wasn't he? He was 2007. He got kicked out off the bus,
Yeah.
didn't he? Yeah. So yeah, Jenkins. Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see kind of how that affects stuff, whether we become worse or become better. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, he's got such a kind of job ahead of him. I don't know really what to expect. Even if Razzie Erasmus had come in, I feel like there's still kind of a miracle that's required for any huge improvement, especially in the short term. So yeah, give him my backing, but like I sound very pessimistic, but I'd have been pessimistic regardless, whoever it was.
Tony, how continually nervous are we that Sherratt still might end up as attack coach there and leave us?
I'm hoping not, because touching on the points that we've talked about before, it doesn't seem worthwhile to move a head coach out of the pro game into the international game when you've got all the other political stuff going around. It might be better just to leave continuity there. Whether we lose some of the other coaches, whether we lose Gethin or anyone like that back up after the job they've done, or whether, like, because Tandy's worked previously with Griff, I think, at the Ospreys, didn't he?
Yeah, Griff would have been his attack coach for a bit
So
there.
whether Griff's ready to go move back into coaching away from the academy setup, like, do we lose people there? It'll be really interesting to see how that all shakes out. On Woody's point, it's not, Tandy's not going to set the world on fire, but if he can just do a solid job and get people caring about the Welsh team as well, and get people back in to watch, then that's the main thing, right? It's like we're not going to get results straight away, but see improvement.
Yeah, I think it's a bit morbid to say, but if we do end up with two teams, they're better off waiting to see which two teams actually end up surviving as well, in what format. Because if they do cut two, then there's going to be a number of coaches out of work there potentially as well. So if you're looking at like who's going to be my attack coach, do I pick up one of the guys from the professional club game? And you think that the options there are like Jockey, Peel. I know Mark Jones has done a bit of defense and stuff as well, but I would probably say he's mainly an attack coach. Those three are head coaches. There's only two head coach roles if you go down to two, so one of them is going to be out of work. So do you end up like sort of just taking an overall view of the game and figuring out your backroom staff from that, where you say, okay, well, Jockey stays as the head coach of the team that's East or Cardiff or whatever it is, and like Peel stays as head coach of the team that's West or Scarlets, or if it's Ospreys and Mark Jones stays, and then whoever the odd one out is becomes attack coach of the national team, which doesn't sound like the optimal way to do it, of just who's left over, but also wouldn't surprise me if the WRU were picking that way as well.
We also employed Tia as just a man to go in and shout at people and scare. If I had him coming into my place of work just telling me to do work, I would be doing that work.
That sounds like a good job title. Right, I think that's pretty much it for us. Actually, I take it back. There was one question that came in, which was I couldn't really fit it into to any particular part, but it was a question. I have to find it now.
How Andrew Ford is ruining.
Say again.
How Andrew Ford is ruining.
So Nathan on Twitter asks, would love the pod's thoughts on the impact of the BBC losing the broadcast rights for the URC until 2029 and the impact this has on the game's future, especially among young people who may come from less affluent backgrounds and don't have access to subscription TV. Now, yeah, Ford, you are, of course, our media person. It's an interesting question. So I think the way it's likely to be is that Premier Sports are sort of where they did at one point have all of the games and nobody had anything, and then slowly over the last 2-3 years, BBC and S4C have had pretty much every Welsh game shown between the two of them, and now all of a sudden we're going back to Premier Sports showing them all, and S4C maybe having one a weekend. Yeah, how much do we think that's a bad thing for eyes on versus how much do we just take any sort of TV deal we can get at the moment?
Yeah, you've got to take any TV deal you can get. But like, I'd say from my perspective, I don't have any like TV in my house that has like a Premier Sports app. Like, there's no like Premier Sports app on like PlayStation or Xbox either. So like, often you're having to use a laptop, which is obviously like, I'm not like massively complaining. It's not too much effort, but there's also the issue of like only one person can log into one Premier Sports account. So if you're sharing that with someone, if you're like round someone's house and you're wanting to chuck it on, it's not as simple as that. So I think that's a big issue in terms of getting eyes on the games is going to be a bit of a struggle, especially in like bigger numbers, like if you're around someone's house, for example. But yeah, you can got to take any TV deal you can get. I think there's definitely been a bit of an improvement in Premier Sports, especially in the days during COVID. I kind of hated every single game on Premier Sports, so at least it's not as bad as that. So I'll take any win I can get.
Just from sorry, Tony. Just from your point of view as like a content creator person as well, like does that make it? Does that make your work sort of more important to a degree of like pushing out there? And also, do you have any relationship with Premier Sports as like getting clips off them or anything like that?
I don't really have, yeah, no relationship with Premier Sports. I've had communication with like the URC, so I guess that would be kind of the same kind of thing to an extent, and they're very much all for me using kind of URC footage, so that's a positive. I know that there's like a lot of with certain apps, like they can't post the highlights on say Instagram or like on their app until like 48 hours after, which is often like normal for like any rights broadcasters. Um, but yeah, I don't think it makes too much of an issue it being on Premier Sports or being on BBC for what I do, and yeah, it's very minimal in the context of other people watching it.
Tony, I don't know, as a sort of just a regular punter, you're like we go to most home games, but away games, obviously you can't just pop over to Glasgow or Durban or wherever if you fancy it. So we're quite reliant on the TV broadcaster from that perspective, aren't we?
Yeah, it's having access to them is major. I'd like the club to do more around away games, maybe, and try and advertise that they're showing those games a bit more, try and drag more people down, maybe from a completely different viewpoint. Or at least making it available for people to go along and let people know that it's on, so you're not losing that sort of aspect. And while it's not as easy to do that as it is just to have it on in the house, how many kids nowadays are going to be sat down and watching a full match? Like I have an 8-year-old and an 8-year-old boy, and I've got a couple of cousins, a couple of nephews who are 12 and 14, and all of them like football. My boy likes rugby. He won't sit and watch a full rugby game unless he's at the game, and even then it's hard work. My nephews won't watch full football games. They'll watch highlights. They'll watch clips of Neymar doing skills and tricks and stuff like that. Like, so how the younger generations are consuming sport content now is completely different. And if Premier Sports are moving all their stuff onto one channel, there needs to be a more concerted effort to make sure that stuff is available for people to watch and able to share socially, even if it is just a clip up. And it's good that Premier Sports are like letting people like 4D news clips and stuff like that, because it's so important just to get eyeballs on the game. We get eyeballs on it, and then people might want to go to games and push from there, right?
There was one other question which I missed off earlier because I was going to fit it in, but it never really worked out. Dav from the club, one of the media guys, has responded with a question of what players would you like to hear from more or learn more about this season for? Do you know if there's anyone that comes to mind on that one necessarily?
Um, yeah, I had to think about this earlier, and it'd be really intriguing to hear from kind of the foreign-based players, as foreign-born players. So, for example, your Johan Mulders and your Ed Burns, kind of their background. Be really intriguing to hear like how kind of Ed Burns settled into somewhere like Cardiff, coming from Leinster. Uh, Maybe it might not paint the most positive light compared to all the money Leinster has, but it'd just be really intriguing. I know they had a kind of interview with Josh McNally the other day, and it's just really fascinating hearing what he kind of says and how kind of Cardiff reignited his love for rugby. So it'd be really interesting to hear that from like Johan Mulder, especially. He didn't really only played a handful of games for the Lions when he was there to play in how many games did he play? 15 games or so last season. So it'd be really intriguing to hear just how the kind of step up and just the difference of playing in a different country is.
Tony, I don't know if anyone comes to mind for you.
From a coach's perspective, I want to hear from Gavin, mainly because he looks furious every time we touch the media. The more we can hear from him, the better.
I'd just say from my perspective as a bit of like a nose, I'd probably be less interested in the players and more like sort of backroom kind of stuff as well. Like what does the week look like for the medical guys and physios and stuff from their point of view, and S&C, and how do you? I think there's something which I think is mentioned occasionally, but it is never really covered. You hear it quite a lot in like test windows where players could step up to Wales and then you sort of Wales fans, just 6, 7 weeks a year guys, sort of go, oh, they look unfit. But so, and then the question is, oh, are they getting prepared properly for it at a club level? And it's very different because in international window, you literally just want to be fit for test rugby for like 4 weeks or the time, or 3 weeks, or however long the Six Nations little blocks are, and that's kind of it. Whereas at club level, you're trying to get people like physically ready to maintain a level over like 9 months worth of playing. So that'd be interesting to hear their side of that from where um, the sort of online chat always gets a bit loud around fitness, but we never hear from the guys themselves. So yeah, that would be my take. Tony, you've got
Dovetail on that, Matt Jones. I really want a day in the life of from the groundsman. And like occasionally he'll post pictures of him sat on the tractor when there's like, especially at winter time when it's all frozen and stuff like that. I want to know how he prepares the pitch and how it, like, especially with how many games are on there, like what his week looks like. Like there's so, to make the nose comment, there's so much bits and pieces that you could make content out of. And I think the club have released like Dan Thomas's farm stuff. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but like what they're like outside of rugby is is an interesting aspect. So yeah.
Yeah, there has been some good content this season. That Dan Thomas's farm thing was good, and obviously they brought back Uncovered as well, which is always a good series looking into pre-season training. So, but yeah, that's our suggestions, Dav. And obviously, you work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so please do make it happen. I also like the idea of Matt Jones showing us his house, and it's just absolutely filled with those black rubber bits. Like when he gets home every day, he just takes his shoes off, and they're just absolutely piling up at his door. Because I play five-a-side once a week, and the current Mrs. Pierce gets in a right state as I come through the door and get them everywhere.
Small children, maybe he's filled up like a sand pit from.
I think that's it for any of the business. Anything from either of you two extra? No, we've covered quite a lot there. A bumper podcast to get back into it. We'll continue pretty much every week now up to the start of the season. We've got a few guests, which I'll say we've got Alid Summerhill next week. I need to like 100% confirm it, but hoping to get Alid Summerhill on next week, and then hoping to get a few others on up until the start of the season. Then once we get into that mid-September spot, we'll be focusing on on-field action as the Rags and then the first get going. But until then, gents, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you all for listening. Do feel free to like and subscribe and leave us a review. Until next week, catch you soon.